Sat Sri Akal, Gianna. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. I would like to, first of all, begin by thanking Elder Larry Grant for his welcome, as well as his teachings of the colonial legacy, as well as the colonial present. And I would like to acknowledge that that we are on Musqueam territory, the traditional unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam peoples, and it's a privilege to be here today and to open this event. My name is Hartej Gill. I am a faculty member in educational studies in the program of educational administration and leadership. Now it is my honor to introduce Dr. J.Archibald and Dean Frank from the Faculty of Education. Many of you will know them as leaders, mentors, and allies for people in this room as well as beyond. And so I think I will invite them to come up now to open our first plenary panel. And the Year of Indigenous Education, of which this event is a part, would not have been possible without the committed efforts and support of Dean Frank, as well as the hard work and dedication of Dr. J.Archibald. And many of you will know that this is the first time that such an event, such a focus has taken place within the faculty, within the departments, within the university, and the larger community for a full year. So I think that's quite an accomplishment for our faculty as well as the university. And it is to both these leaders that we are very grateful for that. So thank you. I would also like to thank you for joining us today in supporting this event and in supporting the solidarity that I think we hope will emerge, as well as the messy and complicated dialogues that Handel has alluded to. We hope that we will have an opportunity to engage in many of those as well today. So let me begin by introducing Dr. J.Archibald. Dr. J.Archibald, or Kiem, meaning strong, clear water, is from the Stolo and Kaklip First Nations. She is the Associate Dean of Indigenous Education, the Director of Native Indian Teacher Education Program, and Professor in Educational Studies in the Department of the Faculty of Education here at UBC. She is an internationally renowned scholar and activist in Aboriginal and Indigenous education. In her recent publication, Indigenous Story Work, Educating the Heart, Mind, Body, and Spirit, Dr. Archibald worked closely with elders and storytellers who shared both traditional and personal life experience stories in order to develop ways of bringing storytelling methodologies and Coast Salish epistemologies into educational contexts. At UBC, Dr. Archibald has held the position of Director of First Nations House of Learning from 1993 to 2001. She received a National Aboriginal Achievement Inspire Award in 2000, and an Honorary Doctorate of Letters from Capilano University and Simon Fraser University, and the Simon Fraser University Outstanding Alumni Award for Academic Achievement in 2012. In 2013, she received a Distinguished Career Achievement Award from the American Education Researchers Association. This award recognized Dr. Archibald's significant contributions to the understanding of issues that disproportionately affect minority populations, as well as contributions she has made in education, research, and development over the span of her career. So thank you, Dr. Archibald, for joining us today. Dean B.Frank. Dr. B.Frank was appointed Dean to the Faculty of Education in April 2011. In addition to being Dean, he continues to supervise and mentor several PhD students and candidates in the area of gender, health, and medical education, and is currently teaching a graduate course as well. Along with his commitments to teaching, excellence in research and academic leadership, Dean Frank is a dedicated advocate of social justice and equity. Prior to his current appointment, Dr. Frank was professor and head of the Division of Medical Education in the Faculty of Medicine at Dalhousie University in Halifax. During his time in medicine, Dr. Frank worked extensively at the national and international levels, including work on projects in Tanzania, Kazakhstan, Turkey, and Pakistan in medical education, focusing on faculty development. Dr. Frank has also worked with faculties of medicine across Canada toward the promotion of diversity and cultural competency within the medical education environment. In 2005 to 2006, Dr. Frank contributed to the development of a program for Association of Faculties of Medicine of Canada, a cultural diversity training program for teachers of internationally educated care professionals. His particular module, Education for Cultural Awareness, is being used extensively throughout medical schools in Canada. In 2006, Dr. Frank was awarded the May Cohen Gender Equity Award for the Association of Faculties of Medicine Canada in recognition of outstanding effort or achievement of an individual, program, department, or school improving the gender equity environment in academic medicine in Canada. So amazing accomplishments for both our panelists today. So thank you very much. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dean Frank and Dr. Archibald.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and I was just sitting here just beaming in fact, saying, oh, what a great way to start out a Monday morning. Being and thinking about we too are idle no more. I want to thank Elder Larry Grant for giving us these important teachings and provoking important thoughts for us. I love that. And Larry can talk as long as he wants, whenever, and to welcome us to the ancestral unceded territories of Musqueam. And I also want to acknowledge the First Nations House of Learning for having us in this wonderful facility, Stiwatan Hall. And I also want to acknowledge another elder who's joined us, Elder Jerry Ullman, who's been very much involved in many of the events here at the First Nations House of Learning and on the UBC campus. We normally do introduce the house posts, and in this session, I think I'll work that in too. Bly and I decided we wanted to have a bit of somewhat of a conversation and get an opportunity to ask each other questions. And I thought, great, good opportunity to ask the dean questions in front of others. So we talked about it, and we thought, well, let's do this, and we have questions we'll ask each other about our respective roles and how that relates to Indigenous education in the Faculty of Education here at UBC. And then we'll have opportunity, if others here feel like asking us a question, please do so. So we wanted to provide a bit more of a conversation, dialogic approach to this session, and Hartej will also jump in at different times. But if you have a question, please let us know, and we'll work that out in our session.
So first, thank you, Hartej, for the introduction. I just want to say good morning and to say what a privilege it is for me to be here. I also want to recognize and thank Elder Grant, and to recognize that we have other elders in the room, so thank you. I was here on Saturday morning for the convocation graduation of our Aboriginal Indigenous students, of which there were between 60 and 70 present, all of whom came through the ceremonial door. It was a pretty rich experience. It's also an indication of the work that Joanne and others have done historically over now quite a long period of time. So I feel incredibly privileged. I do want to make a point. The scary part, Dr. Archibald, is not that I'm saying this in front of my colleagues and students and so on, but it's actually being taped. And that's always the worry for me, because as some of my colleagues know, I'm not very good at keeping my inside voice in. It tends to come out. So anyway, we'll deal with that. I just want to say a little tad about my work to contextualize my own politics of what you'll hear this morning. I was delighted to hear Handel talk about what I might frame as the politics of difference. I've spent a lot of time writing and talking about moving beyond a celebration of diversity to actually talking about the politics of difference. And my overarching line on this, and it continues to be, even though I know it's problematic theoretically and politically, but that how do we actually hold difference in place and collapse inequities? So my argument will be, throughout my conversation this morning, that this is actually about the ongoing inequities as a result of the positioning of individuals and groups of people. So I just wanted to say that so you know when I answer Dr. Archibald's very difficult questions where I'll be locating that work, and that's why you can already see it's a bit of worry for a dean that this will be on tape and put up on the web.
Okay, sure. All right. So my first question, Bly, is that you've worked at various universities in Canada, such as Mount St. Vincent, Dalhousie, and Oise University of Toronto, before joining UBC as the dean. Can you share with us some of your impressions about how indigeneity, was positioned at these universities?
There again, so here we go. Absent, and it's not fair, but absent in its positioning, that's a bit of a overgeneralization. In the East, certainly at Acadia, in the Faculty of Education, or in the School of Education, at that time, very little work done in Aboriginal Indigenous education, just absolutely in some way not on the map. Now in the East, for those of you who are familiar with Nova Scotia, St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish actually has a teacher education program for members of Aboriginal communities, in this case the Mi'kmaq community. So there are efforts in Eastern Canada, certainly. Dalhousie, as was in the introduction mentioned, I spent the last 10 years in medicine, in the Faculty of Medicine at Dalhousie, and there much stronger recognition of the need of addressing issues around the health of Aboriginal communities, the development of modules for undergraduate medical students spending time doing their clinical placements in First Nations Aboriginal communities, a recognition of the importance, as was mentioned by Hartej, in addressing these issues of difference, but particularly with relation to First Nations Aboriginal communities in Eastern Canada. Oise, let me say what's happening now. As many of you would know, the recently appointed Dean, Julia O'Sullivan, has appointed an advisor on Aboriginal Indigenous education within the Faculty of Education at Oise. So I think it's coming on the map. Let me say, positioned within that I think there is, and I've said this publicly many times before, and I don't say it just to be politically and to celebrate, there's no other Faculty of Education in the nation that's doing the work that we're doing here in the Faculty of Education with regard to Aboriginal and Indigenous education.
Thanks, Bly. I wondered, you've now been at UBC for 2 years, and I was wondering, when you decided to join UBC, as the Dean of Education, what were your hopes and ideas for Indigenous education that you wanted to see happen here, as a result of your deanship? And I'm sure you might draw on some of the experiences that you've had, especially, we thought of health as one important area. But I was curious to wonder about your hopes and ideas that you might create as Dean of Education for Indigenous Ed.
So I'll look to Hartej to say, okay, that's it, because as many of you know, I can give very long answers to things. First of all, let me say that coming to the Faculty of Education at UBC, I've known Joanne and the work that Joanne does for a very long time. I like to say, Joanne probably doesn't, that if you add our years in education together, I think we're up to about 85 years. Now, that's not our age, that's working in education. I think this coming fall will be year 44 for me. I started in 1969, and Joanne started shortly thereafter, both of us being public school teachers at the time. So that's to say that when I was coming here, I knew of Joanne's work, and I knew of others who were working in the area of Aboriginal Indigenous education. So here's my hope. This is the part where you can then begin to hold me accountable. So when I look at teacher education, and for those of you who know, we have roughly 600 candidates in our teacher education program, and we now have a mandatory course in Indigenous education, so no student can graduate from the Faculty of Education's teacher education program without having taken that course. That's new. I celebrate that. That's a good marker, but it ain't good enough for me. So what I want to say is, rather, it's like when we discovered women, you know, and we redid the economics book, and we left the first 12 chapters on men, and then we did the 13th chapter on women because we just discovered you and added you on. Well, it seems to me, so I don't want to be overly critical, and Joanne's heard me on this before, so I want to say again, I think it's a really good move. But I want to see the day, it won't happen in my term as dean, I want to see the day when I can do the audit. Here's the part, where I can do the audit of every course outline and look at the readings. And see if there are readings, whether it's math methods, French methods, I don't care, science methods, I don't care what the course is. And I can find that the contribution of knowledge to that course is coming from our Aboriginal Indigenous education community. So if I'm looking at that course outline and I'm seeing that that does not exist, yet we're making claims about our commitment to Aboriginal Indigenous education, then I think we're still. So that's not to blame my colleagues, it's to say, that's why I'm also really interested in issues of faculty development. You can't hold people accountable for things that they actually don't know how to do. So what's the education of our general kind of, our faculty around these issues to move it, and you know, my verb is always infiltrate. So how do we actually infiltrate a teacher education program with issues of Indigenous education rather than as the single course? So there's teacher education. That holds the same for me in graduate school, whether it's master's or doctoral. So you know, the add-ons for me, there again, it's a stage, but it doesn't work the way I think that I'd like it to. Let me say some other things. I'd like to see a professorship or a chair in Indigenous teacher education. And I think if we don't establish that really soon, then we're lagging behind. We have a Canada Research Chair advertised at the moment in Indigenous Health and Wellness, a Senior Canada Research Chair. I'm hoping we'll fill that this year. As many of you would know, Joanne is the only Associate Dean of Indigenous Education in terms of any faculty of education in the nation. I think that we need to build within our complement of leaders, including senior leaders at the university. I'd encourage you, you might have a little scan of that one day and see what that looks like, that we need to really emphasize in our hiring practices, not just within the Faculty of Education, but across the wider university. And then also, you know, there again, I'll mark it when we discovered women and gender, that I wasn't, when I was at the, what was historically the only women's university in the British Commonwealth, Mount St. Vincent, and didn't become co-ed until 20 years ago or somewhat recently, and we held the men's population at 15%, never been a man president, and so on. Now, you could raise all kinds of issues about that if you wanted to, because I know it creates the binary, and we could get into theoretical discussions around it. However, It seems to me that in the hiring process in the Faculty of Education and at UBC, you'd want to say to candidates, you do know to where you're coming. And one of our top priorities is Aboriginal Indigenous education. And could you articulate for me at this interview how it is that your work will demonstrate that within your research and teaching, even though that's not your main area of work? So Joanne, there's a little bit of the agenda I have tucked away.
Great, thanks.
So I'm now going to ask Joanne a couple of questions. So Joanne, when did you first arrive as a faculty member at the University of British Columbia?
1981 as a sessional lecturer.
And so in that number of years that you've been here now, what are the kinds of changes that you've seen? Would you highlight some of those? And then I'd really like to concentrate on why that's been possible. Because if we're actually going to provide a kind of strategic approach to this, people need to see, how do you do this?
Gee, when you say 1981, that's so long time ago, isn't it? 32 years now, my goodness. You know, I thought back to 1981, and in our Faculty of Education, I can only remember one Indigenous faculty member, and that was Verna Kirkness. But she makes up for lots. But you know, she was the only one at that time, as any. I don't even think there were any sessionals hired at that point who were Indigenous. And you know, so after, you know, Verna as a Cree educator, when she started, I think she made some important systemic changes within the Faculty of Education, and then of course continued to do that work across the university. And it kind of reminds me of this transformation pole that's to the left of us here, carved by Stan Bevan and Ken McNeil of Northern British Columbia, Tahltan, Tlingit, Nisga'a, Tsimshian ancestries. And we think of this as that work of transformation, that here at the university, there are times, of course, we become transformed, but we also have a dual responsibility to transform this university. And I think Verna's leadership did that. She questioned what we call the status quo. You know, with starting out to say, we don't have Indigenous people teaching at the one program in Faculty of Ed, NITEP, our Indigenous Teacher Ed program, you know, and she questioned that and said, why not? And you know, the university policy is usually, well, people teach the courses who, you know, have a PhD, you know, maybe a master's at that, but was mainly a doctoral degree. Well, she questioned that and said, we have Indigenous educators who have been out teaching for a number of years. You know, they are community leaders. They have Indigenous knowledge, and some were enrolled in master's programs. So in one sense, she helped make a change in that policy in our faculty then, where Indigenous educators started to teach the Indigenous education courses in NITEP and also to lead the program. And I think that was important in that way of the leadership starting to question why not, why can't we, and to find, you know, other criteria which still fit the idea of having knowledge and expertise. I think the other part was that we also had non-Indigenous allies at that point. The Dean of Education, when Verna was here, started out in the role of Director of Indigenous Education, also created space and supported Verna in what she needed to do. So I think that was important to have that kind of leadership support. There were also, you know, very few Indigenous students. We, except for NITEP, which I think has had very healthy numbers. NITEP has been going for 38 years. But in the 80s, we through that decade had up to, over 100 students in NITEP, because it was probably one of the few programs that provided access into post-secondary education and provided a program that was relevant to, Indigenous knowledge and meaningful to Indigenous communities. And so we started out then to look at graduate education, and this is through Verna's leadership, to start an Indigenous graduate concentration called TSCEL, where there was some focus on advanced Indigenous ed and starting to introduce research a little bit, but we really got more into now Indigenous methodologies and probably the last 10 years. So I think, those have been some critical changes where, it's important to start to change university policy for hiring, and then to do that through Indigenous leadership and support of allies. The other important difference, I think, has been having community leadership support. I do recall, when Verna became the director of the First Nations House of Learning, at UBC, she convened a very powerful Indigenous, really it was a community advisory, which was then advised the president. And one of the community leaders challenged the vice provost academic, about promotion and tenure, especially, for, I think at that point there might have been only 2 of us in the late 1980s as tenure track faculty, and so things started to kind of open up a little bit at that point.
Joanne is always good and appropriate at recognizing histories and the work that people do and others do. In this case, some of the conversation focused on Verna. Now I'm going to be really specific with Joanne, and she also finds it very difficult, I know, to do this part, to put the I have done and so on. So, Joanne, when were you appointed as Associate Dean of Indigenous Education? And as the Associate Dean, what has that allowed you to do?
Okay, sure. Well, I became Associate Dean in 2005, and it took me a while to make a decision to take on that position, because, over the years I've done a fair amount of this type of work, and I really wanted to be a faculty member, teaching and doing the research and engagement with communities, but I guess I decided to take that position because it was an opportunity, I think, to be at some of the decision-making tables within the Faculty of Education. And I felt that was important, to be present and to be engaged. So this position, I think, has provided that opportunity and space that I could be with other department heads, other associate deans, the dean, and when you're sitting at the table with others, you just can't be ignored, really. And when I find if we are not represented at these important tables, it's easy to not have Indigenous education on the agenda, or maybe it's on the agenda, but towards the end of the meeting or something. So being there has been important, and I think being able to talk to the various these other colleagues and faculty leaders to get a sense of how they might do something in their faculties, and to know that there are opportune times when a funding call comes out from the university, and to be able to pitch the idea that Indigenous ed should be one of the projects that the faculty puts forward. And this has happened, and that's helped where I was able to do that. And as a result, we gained one more tenure track faculty position. We gained another NITEP Field Center, and all of these are ongoing funds. We were able to get lots of funding for PhD students. So I think those probably wouldn't have happened, if I hadn't been in a position to be at the table to kind of look people in the eye and say, why not?
Including her dean. Let me just, it comes back, I do want to raise the kind of structural issues. Joanne, I think you're the only full Aboriginal professor in the university. So let me say why I asked that. So just now in the positioning for the search committee of a new president at UBC, I was in contact with Joanne and said, was she willing to have her name go forward and so on. Then we were told by the structural kind of barriers that she as an associate dean and a non-member of the bargaining unit could not be there in that position. So I understand that. It's not a criticism, it's just there again to say, interesting how then Joanne has, since my arrival, sat on the Dean's Personnel Committee for the faculty, which is the Tenure and Promotion Committee, Joanne knows this, that I try to avoid going to Joanne and putting yet again everything on Joanne, and we've had that conversation. But so critically important for Joanne to be a member of that Tenure and Promotion Committee at the dean's level, and then with associate deans being excluded now from the bargaining unit, we were told this year that Joanne could not serve on that committee. Well, in order to serve on the Dean's Personnel Committee, you have to be a full professor, and I have no other full professors to serve in terms of Aboriginality to serve on that committee. So, it's tricky business kind of working the positioning within the structure that still often acts as a barrier. So I did want to sort of raise that, because for me coming here, it's been so incredibly important to have, as Joanne says, certain kind of positioning, and I think that's not just within the faculty, it's within the university system as well.